Hello and welcome to another video. In this video we're going to talk about the family that surrounded the Kray twins. It's quite important to talk about the family that surrounded them. In the time frame when the twins were about on the streets, when they were young or a bit older, family life was quite important. People were very loyal to their families in most cases. People still are today, but back then everything seemed to be more close-knit. I wasn't around in them days, of course, but that's just the way it seems to come across. Close-knit families and also close-knit communities when compared to today. And back then it was more the case, especially in places like the East End of London. I will start with the twins' father's side of things. Charlie Kray Sr. He came from quite a large family. Charlie Kray Sr. had 5 brothers and 3 sisters, although one sister died when she was 2. Charlie Kray Sr. was the 3rd born, and he was born in 1907. A couple of his brothers would feature around the twins in the 1960s. One was Billy Kray and the other was Alfie Kray. I haven't really read anything of the other brothers being involved with the twins. Alfie Kray met and introduced Ian Barry and Scotch Jack Dixon to the twins in the early 1960s. Alfie Kray ran a small club for the twins where people would play cards and drink. This was known as Spielers. Billy Kray features in some photos of the twins, and most notably one taken in the foyer of the Kentucky Club, which the twins were running at the time in Mile End in the East End of London. Billy Kray can be seen peering over Charlie Kray Sr.'s right shoulder. Charlie Kray Sr. grew up in Gorsuch Street in Hoxton. It was also known as St John's Terrace, but it had a name change around 1940. This is Gorsuch Street today. All the houses that were there have now long gone. Growing up, Charlie Kray would often accompany his father on the knocker. On the knocker was going to houses, seeing if people had things to sell, like clothes. They would buy them and then sell them on at a stall that they often set up. Charlie Kray Sr. would carry on with this occupation for quite a while and would later take his sons out with him on occasions. Charlie, Reg and Ron, but I think mainly Charlie Kray. Charlie Kray Sr.'s father, James Kray or Jimmy Kray, and also known as Mad Jimmy Kray, he was a hard man and would often be out on the street fighting, and this was often after a few drinks. I assume he got the name Mad Jimmy Kray from these fights. It was said that he was very aggressive and he didn't care who he fought. The other side of the twins family was the Lees, their mother's side. They were a bit different from the Kray side. They were more of a gentle nature compared to the street fighting Krays, and the Lees would have the most influence over the twins throughout their life. The twins' great grandfather on the Lee side was called James, and he also had a nickname, Crutcher Lee. He was a butcher by trade, but unfortunately he had bad epileptic seizures and he also drank quite a bit, and this didn't help with his epilepsy, and he often didn't know quite what he was doing. One night he attacked his family and was then sent to Longgrove Asylum in Epsom, where he would remain for the rest of his life. Ronnie Kray would later also be sent there for a short time in the late 1950s. Because of the fate of his father due to his heavy drinking, the twins' grandfather, also called James but mainly referred to as Jimmy, became a teetotaler. Jimmy Lee later said of his father, "He wasn't a bad man, except he took alcohol and it ruined him, as it's ruined many a good man. It made him epileptic. I can remember as a boy him having 5 or 6 attacks a day, and all the time he would still be drinking. Although not as violent as Jimmy Kray, Jimmy Lee was a fiery character, and he was a boxer known as the Southpaw Cannonball for his devastating left hook. Jimmy Lee would be an important figure in the twins' lives, and he would often sit them down and tell them stories of his boxing days and his bare knuckle fighting. He was also a street entertainer and had a regular party trick of putting a white hot poker on his tongue. It was said he would entertain the Bethnal Green locals in the air raid shelters during the war, while they were hiding from the German bombs that were dropping over London and devastating the city. The air raid shelters were often underground train stations. We can assume that the station he'd done this in was mainly the Bethnal Green tube station. Jimmy Lee had 3 sons and 3 daughters. One of the sons died very young, but our main interest here are the 3 daughters, Rose, Violet and May. They were born in that order, with Violet, as you know, being the twins' mother. I don't know too much about the 2 surviving sons. Jimmy Lee, while not seeming as extreme with his violence as Jimmy Kray, he did whack a few landlords of the places the Lee family lived, as they did move about quite a bit, and he did have a short fuse. The Lee family eventually settled in Hackney Road in Bethnal Green, and the family all lived in very close proximity to each other, and that part of Hackney Road became known as Lee Corner. The 3 girls had different characters. Rose was more dominant of the 3 and was a bit fiery. She had a temper, and she would think nothing of lashing out at anyone who upset her. Violet and May seem to have been more placid. The Lee family and the Kray family collided when Violet met Charles David Kray. They married in 1927 when Violet left home unannounced. Her father Jimmy Lee did not like Charlie Kray at all. Charlie took after his father with his heavy drinking, and Jimmy Lee did not want him with his daughter. It caused a bit of a big divide in the family, with Violet and Charlie Kray getting married. Jimmy Lee kind of disowned his daughter at this point, so going back and living with her family with her new husband was not an option, so they moved in with Charlie Kray Sr.'s Aunt Betsy at Charlie Kray's childhood home in Gorsuch Street. Violet was pregnant by this time, and their first child was born on the 9th of July 1927, and they named him Charlie. Charlie's birth seemed to have softened Violet's father, and he did often ask after his grandson, but he still had contempt for Charlie Kray Sr. He wanted his daughter back, but he just could not accept her husband. There is good reason for Jimmy Lee not to like Charlie Kray Sr., but whether it was known to Jimmy Lee at the time, who knows. Charlie Kray Sr., he was a heavy drinker like his father was, and he became a bit of a brute. Sober, he was quite charming and thoughtful, but when he had had some drink in him, he became unpredictable and aggressive towards Violet and his son Charlie. In 1929, Violet found herself pregnant again, and this time with a girl who she would call Violet. Unfortunately, baby Violet died after birth. Reggie said later in a book that baby Violet was born prematurely, but the Lee family paint a different picture to this. They claim that Charlie Kray Sr. gave Violet a bashing the night before the birth after an evening in the pub. The following morning, Violet was not well and bleeding between the legs. She asked her husband to stay with her, but he refused and he was out the door. Baby Violet was born an hour later and died in Violet's arms. This does paint a disturbing picture of Charlie Kray Sr., and it could have only intensified the hate that her father, Jimmy Lee had for him. Violet and Charlie Kray Sr. soon got tired of living at Gorsuch Street, and they eventually moved to a place at 68 Steen Street in Haggerston. It is sometimes given as being in Hoxton, but it is actually Haggerston. They are both very close to each other, so this is where the confusion lies. This is the map which shows Steen Street in Haggerston, and as you can see, Hoxton is just within walking distance. It's a very thin line between both places, but to be completely accurate, 68 Steen Street was in Haggerston, and it was here on the 24th of October 1933 that Violet Kray gave birth to twins Reginald and Ronald, with Reggie being the eldest by 10 minutes. I have detailed the twins' early lives in their own separate videos that are on the channel, so you're welcome to go and have a look at them if you wish. With Violet and her family away from the Kray stronghold in Gorsuch Street, this gave the chance for Violet to rekindle things with her family, and especially her father, Jimmy Lee, and this they done. The twins were a big part of this. Their birth seemed to have brought the family back together again. Eventually the Lees would congregate and live at Valence Road, but just before this happened, Violet, Charlie Kray Sr. and the boys moved away from Steen Street to Dunlow Place, just off the Hackney Road. It's now called Dunlow Street. This is the road today. They lived at number 1 Dunlow Place, and it was a flat. It would be here where these flats are, but I'm not sure if these are pre-1930s build. They look more like 1960s to me. The family then moved from here and stayed at 218 Hackney Road, where they lived above a shop. This is where 218 Hackney Road is. All the shops have long gone and been demolished, but this was the final stop for Violet and her family before they made their way about a mile south to Valence Road. Violet and Charlie Kray Sr. were the first to arrive at Valence Road, but they would soon be followed by the other members of the family: Rose, May, Violet's mother and father, Jimmy Lee and Mary. I haven't really mentioned Mary, Violet's mother, but I will here. She was from German and Irish parentage and was from Whitechapel. She married Jimmy Lee in 1898 and she had 5 siblings. Her husband Jimmy wore the trousers in the house though. His word was the final word. Mary is seen in cine film of the Kray family that was filmed in the early 1960s. She is filmed walking towards the camera with one hand in her pocket, walking past a ladder with her husband on. Her husband Jimmy Lee is also seen in the footage on a ladder, smiling and holding a paintbrush. The Lee family settled into Valence Road quite happily, but life was interrupted by the Second World War, where the twins were evacuated to Hadley in Suffolk. One less happy thing for the twins at Valence Road was the treatment towards them from their cousin Billy Wiltshire. Billy was the son of their Auntie Rose. Billy had a cruel nature towards the twins. He was older than them, but he would go with them to play on bomb sites left by the German bombs after the war. Billy would often throw bricks at the twins, aiming for their heads, and he also gave punches that left big bruises. One of the other tricks was to hold their heads under the water at the local baths until they almost passed out. Some of the things Billy done could be classed as torture, and this must have had a big effect on the twins. It was bullying. Billy Wiltshire would later serve in Malta with the army, and he came back a changed man who lived a straight life and a hard-working life as a market porter in Covent Garden. In Billy Wiltshire's younger years, he took after his mother Rose with his aggression. Rose was just as fiery and aggressive. Rose would take no nonsense from anyone, and if needed, she would lash out physically and verbally. She was Ronnie Kray's favourite aunt. She let the twins get away with things that other family members would not. She was the aunt that turned the blind eye. Unfortunately, Rose died on Christmas Day in 1957. Ronnie Kray at the time was serving a sentence for assault on a man called Terry Martin. Rose had leukemia and the family knew of this for some time, but they chose not to tell Ronnie about it. They felt Ronnie had enough on his plate in prison. The family did not want Rose to die in hospital, so they chose to take turns in caring for her at her home in Hackney Road. Violet Kray later recalled, "The doctors warned us that the end would come with a hemorrhage, and it wouldn't be nice to see. Her feet swelled up, and the rest of her went as thin as a rake. Then on Christmas Eve, the bleeding started." Ronnie Kray was starting to do okay in prison at this time after initially being quite disruptive, but on the 27th of December he received a letter from Reggie informing him of his Aunt Rose's death. This was devastating to Ronnie, and his mental health condition deteriorated so badly that he was deemed extremely dangerous. He was eventually certified insane and sent to Longgrove Asylum in Epsom, where years earlier his great-grandfather had been sent. The death of Rose was a devastating blow for the family, as you can imagine, and it was made all the worse when the family got a letter informing them of Ronnie Kray being certified insane. Ronnie did recover somewhat from his severe bout of madness and was eventually released from Longgrove back to prison, where he finished the remainder of his sentence in prison. The twins' Aunt May looked very much like the twins' mother Violet. In one photograph it's hard to tell them apart. May had a daughter called Rita, who the twins looked on like a sister. One notable thing about Rita, or cousin Rita, she was insulted one time by a friend of the Webb brothers at the Royal Dance Hall in Tottenham. The twins and Rita used to frequent there. The Webbs were brothers Billy and Ronald Webb. The friend of the Webbs was made to apologise to Rita, and this was given in front of a full crowd at the Royal Dance Hall. I'm sure if the apology had not have happened, there would have been some bloodshed, and I think this did tar the Webbs a little bit as far as the Krays were concerned, and it was probably on their mind in later years when there was a fight at the Old Horns pub in Bethnal Green. The twins' Aunt May was married to Albert Filler. Albert fought in World War II and would often take Violet Kray to visit the twins in prison after they were sentenced to life. He would often come home from his job at the fish market where he worked night shifts, and he would take Violet to the prison visits without any sleep. Albert was a loyal man to the twins, and he treated them like sons. The twins' Aunt May also visited the twins right up until she died in 1988, aged 77. Her daughter Rita, the twins' cousin, she died in 2015, aged 79. She still lived in Bethnal Green at the time, and only a short distance from Hackney Road.
Where the grass is, there's the trees there, and behind those trees is the new set of houses been built, and that right opposite where those flats are, that's where the twins and all the family lived along there. And Aunt Violet did love them. She worshipped the ground they walked on, and like they did get away with a lot of things that some children don't get away with. They always made you feel nice when you went into their club, always made people welcome, and you knew there wasn't going to be no trouble there.
Rita has a daughter called Kim. She's still around, and Rita also had a son called David, who I believe is also still around. Another cousin of the twins was Joe Lee. He was the son of old Joe Lee and Sissy. Joe Lee also had a sister called Connie, but she sadly died aged 19. Joe Lee died in 2015. There was another cousin of the twins called Roy. He was the son of Johnny and Maud Lee, but I don't know anything about him. Gary Kray, as you probably know, was Charlie Kray's son. Gary had a sister called Nancy. Well, it was his half sister. I think Dolly Kray, Charlie Kray's wife, had an affair, and then Nancy was born due to that. But Charlie Kray did take Nancy on as his own, I believe. I don't know too much about Gary Kray, but it is often given that he died of AIDS. This is not true, as he actually died of cancer, aged 44. So very young, very sad. Gary Kray is the only known child that was born to any of the Kray brothers. Violet Kray would die in 1982, aged 72, and the twins' father, Charlie Kray Sr., would die 7 months later in 1983. The twins famously attended their mother's funeral in 1982, but they did not attend their father's.
Ronnie was first, now classified as criminally insane. Then came Reggie, also handcuffed from the maximum security wing at Parkhurst, where a few months ago he tried to kill himself. At the end of the short service, the twins were taken back to their cells without having seen their mother buried.
It was said that they didn't want to attend their father's funeral because they didn't want to cause a scene again, because 7 months previously at their mother's funeral there was a big media scrum and lots of people outside the church. But I think the truth is that they never really liked their father and just didn't want to go. They would have heard the stories about Charlie Kray Sr. being a bit violent towards their mother, and maybe they witnessed it growing up after he had had a drink and that. So I think even if there was gonna be no media at the funeral and no people, I still think they would not have attended their father's funeral. The twins were very family oriented, and they were loyal to their family and they expected it back, and most of them were. There is the exception, of course, in the case of Ronnie Hart, who was the distant cousin on their mother's side, and he gave evidence against the twins at their trial at the Old Bailey in 1969. It was said that he was asked to take the rap for the murder of Jack McVitie that Reggie Kray committed in October 1967. We don't really know for a fact whether this is the case or not, or if it was just said for justification for giving evidence against the twins. I do personally find it a bit hard to believe fully, as he was family and there was plenty of other people that they could have picked on to take the rap for the McVitie murder. For instance, they could have tried it on with Connie Whitehead or Ronnie Bender, who were both present at the flat the evening that McVitie was murdered. I feel the twins' treatment by their cousin Billy Wiltshire could have a big impact on them. It was bullying, and it's hard to see that it would not affect them in some way going forward. Some things he done were almost torture, like holding their heads under the water until they nearly passed out. It's possible that this affected Ronnie more than it did Reggie, and probably didn't help Ronnie's mental health condition going forward, but I'm just speculating on that. There has been rumours of kids fathered by Reggie Kray, but I don't believe this at all, so I won't really go into that. I'm sure there was also rumours years ago about Reggie Kray's sperm being kept somewhere for future use. Once again, I don't believe that. That sounds like someone was just trying to get a few quid with a story in the newspapers. So that's about it for the Kray and Lee family. I have mainly mentioned the Lee side of the family, but that is because there is just more information about the Lee side, and the Lees featured more prominently in the lives of the twins, apart from Alfie and Billy Kray knocking about I don't really know if any other members of their father's side of the family had much to do with the twins. The Kray side were disliked by the Lee side. There seems to be a long-standing hatred there that stemmed from the two granddads on either side disliking each other after Charlie Kray Sr. had got with Violet. So I will leave it at that for now. I have just scratched the surface with this. It is just an overview of the family that surrounded the twins. There will be a lot more that I don't know, and I've probably missed out a load of stuff. There is a book by Rita and Joe Lee called Inside the Kray Family. I haven't read it myself, but it's supposed to be a good book. So if you want further information on the Lee family, it's maybe a book you should pick up. So that's about it. As always, if I've got anything wrong, you're welcome to point that out to me. And I would like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.
Violet, their mother, who was immensely respectable. I mean, I knew her really quite well. She was a sort of Cockney Queen mother. And, you know, her boys were her bunny rabbits, and she never, you know, their boys would never do anything. And she genuinely believed it.
They idolised the mother. Not so much the old man. No, they used to have their rows with the old man because he didn't like what they was doing. You know, no one likes their children to be like they was.